Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
All across the fantasy universe, welcome into year 5 of the Fantasy Football Hustle Draft Plan Show. What's going on, everybody? I am Brian Drake, FightingChanceFantasy.com. SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio is where you find me. And do we have one for you tonight? It's the one you wait all year for, the one you keep checking YouTube for, the one you're scrolling Twitter at FF Hustle wondering when they're going to drop it, when they're going to drop it. Well, guess what? Tonight is the night. Pull over in your car, tell your kids to leave, go in the basement, lock the door, crack a beer, because I got Dwain on the line. Mr. McFarland, after a week of hanging out with you in Canton, Ohio, now I get to pick your brain on what we lovingly call the Draft Plan Show. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, man. Like this is the show, right, of the year. This is the one, like you said, this is the one everybody loves. So I've been thinking about this, as you guys may know, full time, doing fantasy football now. Like I've had plenty of time to think about this more than ever. I've also been drafting a lot of teams over at FFPC. I've done one over at NFFC. Brian, you helped, run that one with me and Nelson. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts, been tracking all the utilization stuff from the preseason. So tightened up all of the ranks yesterday and today, redoing my tiers this week over at PFF. So it's like, yeah, man, it's time. Like this is the biggest weekend of the year coming up. Obviously a lot of folks are going to do it the weekend after as well, but the two biggest draft weekends of the year. So we have to have the Draft Plan Show.
No question about it. I've never had so many people come up to me, Dwain, as I have this week. And they're like, hey, listen, I got my home league draft this weekend. I've done no research. I got kids, they got soccer, they got baseball, back to school shopping. The wife's on me. I got to cut the grass. It's raining every single day. Like I need you guys to tell me what to do. And I don't think there's been a year, Dwain, where there's as many different ways to go about attacking your draft as we have this year. And to quote my good friend Bruce Springsteen, and in the lonely cool before dawn, you hear their engines roaring on, but when you get to the porch, they're gone on the wind. So Mary, climb in. It's a town full of losers, and we're pulling out of here to win. So that's what we're going to do here. We talk about it on the Hustle. Listen, learn, win your damn league. That's our 2022 mindset. So let's kind of pull out right now, Dwain. Let's zoom out and take that 30,000-foot view. Strengths and weaknesses sort of the positions, how you're looking at fantasy football in 2022 before we get into the nitty-gritty of, okay, we're picking early, who's of value in the third, Time to take a breath and zoom out. Tell the people what you're thinking, big picture.
Yeah, and you hit the main thing. I don't remember a year that was more flexible. People will still manage to really screw up their drafts, but because they're going to get 5 or 6 rounds in, and there's going to be all these opportunities to really round out their team in a really awesome way. And they won't have thought ahead, and then they're going to stumble right through those rounds. And then that's where you can really pounce. But between rounds 7 and 11 this year, like whatever your need is, if you're wanting upside running backs, if you're wanting upside wide receivers, if you want to get, your quarterback, if you want to wait on tight end, you can. There is a way that based on the way your draft's going, you should always be doing if-then analysis, and you should always be planning out multiple rounds ahead. That's how you get ahead of your opponents. That's also tells you when maybe you pull the trigger a little bit early, right, on a player. We don't want to reach by multiple rounds. We want to get value, but you got to know when that time comes that you want to pull the trigger a little bit early. You're also going to know when I don't have to pull the trigger yet. I could go ahead and do this other thing, and then I can come back over here to this position. So the real key is, thinking through what your early rounds might look like based on what you think the strengths are, like in rounds 7, 8, 9, 10, even 11. And like I mentioned, and we'll talk through the positions a little bit more as we go, but there's really a lot of strength around all of them. What I would say, like I've built teams every way so far. I really like getting at least one running back in the first 2 rounds. I typically like getting one receiver in the first 2 rounds. If I don't get a receiver in one of the first 2 rounds, I'm typically getting one of the elite tight ends. And I think both of those are valid strategies this year, leaves you with a lot of flexibility. But I've also had times, Brian, where I've drafted 3 running backs in a row, and there's a very specific criteria that I have around when I would do that and the way the board would fall. You don't just want to cram 3 running backs to cram 3 running backs, right? You're doing it in a very thoughtful manner. But in the end, even if you just cram 3 that aren't that great, you still should be thinking ahead. Like, what does that mean for the rest of your draft? And we'll also talk through, like, one way to think about this. We have a diverse audience, right? A lot of people that want to play more in the mid stakes, high stakes stuff. So we'll talk a little bit about what things look like on FFPC versus what things might look like in your home league, because they can be very different in what type of value you might be able to achieve. But at the end of the day, you can really build any way you want. Another general zoom out kind of thing is I don't like the running backs basically once you get to the middle of round 4 all the way through round 6. But then you get to round 7 and wow, like, I get really excited again. Several guys will talk about, Chase Edmonds, talk about Damian Pierce, talk about Kareem Hunt, Cordell Patterson. Anybody that's following me knows, like, that these are guys, it's an archetype I'm looking for. I want the explosive, back that plays in the passing game. Those guys all check that box. Very sadly, I had to move James Cook a little bit down today in the ranks. I had to move him out of that. I had to move him out of that group. He's still a good target, right? ADP, like, he's still the archetype, but we just haven't seen him get the passing down work yet in the preseason. Now, that doesn't always mean anything. Some of these teams, they keep the veil over stuff like that, and all of a sudden week 1 comes out and boom, James Cook gets all the passing down work, right? So we don't want to move players too far. He still fits the archetype. Kind of getting on a sidetrack here, but at the end of the day, a lot of running backs in that range, but there's really a lot of receivers that you can be taking in those middle rounds. And it can be a pretty flat tier, but that's also those middle rounds is where I really like to try to differentiate at quarterback. I don't want to take Josh Allen in round, 2. The guy goes in round 2 over in Yahoo, goes in round 3 in ESPN. So in your home leagues, he's going way too early. You play over in mid stakes, high stakes stuff. Besides, this is not best ball. We're not talking best ball tonight. This is redraft, where everybody pretty much drafts 1 quarterback, or if they draft 2, right, they're not drafting their second one right away, right? They're not drafting 2 inside the top 10 rounds typically, like you'll see in best ball with some teams. But I love, love, love getting Kyler Murray. I love getting Lamar Jackson. I love getting Jalen Hurts, and I love getting Trey Lance. I'm trying to come away every draft with one of those quarterbacks, and I'm typically reading the board based on where I'm at, and it's a great pivot. Some people want to take Allen Lazard. I say, no way. Just give me Kyler Murray. I don't need to mess with Allen Lazard. Like, I can turn around and get a better receiver than Allen Lazard around later, but Kyler Murray, right? There's not very many. There's not very many guys that could truly give you a chance to run for 1,000 yards and pass for 5,000 yards. And again, remember, the big difference in quarterback scoring over like the last 4 or 5 years has been the QB1 is separated more and more and more from the QB12, because what's happening is, right, you've got these dual threat quarterbacks, and then typically your QB12 is your normal, drop back passer. And you're depending on touchdowns for them to come through with a big season. So if you look at like QB5, QB6, you're still getting a dual threat quarterback, right? Like Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray. So the difference between Josh Allen and one of those won't be that much. And so the person that takes Josh Allen in round 3, like, you're essentially getting almost the same thing in a points per game. Yeah, Josh Allen's better, but you're getting a very similar commodity, and you're getting him 2 or 3 rounds later. And guess what? When they took Josh Allen, you were grabbing T. Higgins. You were grabbing, whatever running back it is you want. You were grabbing Kyle Pitts. And so some of these other positions where it's tougher to differentiate just based on the way the boards are falling. So those are some of my general, things. Again, lots of flexibility this year, lots of opportunity in round 7 through 11 to do what you need to do with your team, depending on how you started. And there's really, I even like wide receiver. I like it the least, honestly, this year. But I still like it. And I've built some really good rosters that way. So yeah, happy to jump in.
And really, when you look at how do you win a league, and can you win your league on draft day? I mean, probably not. It's going to take in-season management. It's going to take.
You can win your league on draft day for sure.
Most
of my look, and you need waivers, but I'll be honest with you. Most of my best teams that have absolutely just destroyed, like crushed competition, made it into the tops of these tournaments. Not that I didn't have to work the waivers; it's really important. But when you look back at it, I mean, a huge portion was laid in the draft. Last year, if you drafted Cooper Kupp in round 4, Like that was freaking huge, right? If in 2017, you were getting Kareem Hunt in round 3, that was really hard to offset. If you were getting Alvin Kamara in round 10, that was really hard to offset. People had to work waiver wires really freaking hard to offset that kind of advantage that you're creating. Now, every year can also be a little bit different, right? When it comes to what percentage, right, might a draft have won the average player versus what, free agency took. Because like if you look at 2 years ago, after week 1, everybody dropped Justin Jefferson, because like, oh, Olabisi Johnson's the starter. And so I swooped in and grabbed Justin Jefferson off the wire for like, $3-5, like everywhere that I could. And guess what? Like, so he ended up being my biggest he ended up being my biggest player of the year, and he was a free agent. So it can be a little different, each year. But this year I just have a feeling like I could be wrong, but I feel like this year it's a draft year. I feel like you could just really smash it in the draft this year.
I was tweeting out the other day how you should go back and look at your old draft boards. And I pulled out my home league that we often reference here on the show. And there was a guy in my league. He drafted 12th. His picks, he started the draft with Jonathan Taylor, Najee Harris, Josh Allen, Cooper Kupp, and then a few rounds later took Deebo Samuel. That's talking about winning the league at a draft. The guy actually ended up finishing in 3rd place. Just the way that fantasy playoffs work. But that's a guy killing it on the waiver wire. But definitely go back and check out some of your old draft boards. That's kind of a nerdy thing no one ever talks about. But if you have access to what your buddies always do, you can look and say, hey, listen, Bob over here loves drafting tight ends in the first 3 rounds. He drafts Travis Kelce every year. This guy loves taking quarterbacks a little earlier. So it's very basic. Everyone always says, know your league, but it's true, guys. Know your scoring, know your league, know who you're drafting against. Are they going to, is your a league where the running backs get hoarded super early? If so, maybe that's where we'll start. We'll start talking about the running backs because it seems like they're the lifeblood of fantasy football. So Dwain, according to your first round ADP, you love JT, CMC, Eckler, Henry, Najee Harris, Delvin Cook, Joe Mixon. Those, according to your article at PFF.com, those are your first round running backs. So let's say we're starting out. Let's start things early. First half of the first round. How do you want to start your draft? You've got the 3rd overall pick.
Well, let's just break it down real quick, like into sections. If I'm picking in the first 3 picks, I want one of Jonathan Taylor or Christian McCaffrey if they're there. If they're gone, I'm going Justin Jefferson or Cooper Kupp, like in the first 3 picks. If you're picking in the middle, most likely you're not going to get JT or CMC. Obviously, if one of them falls to you, to take them. You don't need us to tell you to do that. I am team CMC 101 at this point in PPR, just with how much we're seeing Nyheim Hines potentially have a role again. And knowing that, the Colts, man, they got to run the ball a ton last year because they had the 3rd highest rate of leading game scripts. Like that's a very fragile number. That number could easily flip to the other side to where all of a sudden the Colts trail, more often, or at least are just in more close games. And if that alone could lead, to some loss of work for Taylor. But look, those are the top 2 guys. And again, it's not even getting hung up on players. Remember, we'll talk about archetypes tonight. We don't want to be hung up just on player takes. You want to be thinking more broad than that, like around what type of, profile we're getting here. So we'll talk through some of those things. But the other thing really being the fact that upside, if you look over the last 10 years in PPR leagues, 67% of the time, the top 3 scorers, right? 67% of the top 3 scorers in PPR are running backs. And that's including the injuries they suffered. That's not me doing points per game. That's just raw points. So even though, yes, running backs get hurt, guess what? Usually 2 out of the 3 top 3 players, even in a PPR, are running backs. That means the ceiling outcome, right, is just bigger for backs than it typically is for receiver. Now you're going to get a Cooper Kupp year, but those are weird, right? Cooper Kupp outscored Josh Allen last year. Like it's a very random, rare kind of year that we got out of Cooper Kupp. So again, ceilings are what you're getting from your running backs. What you get from the receivers in the first round, yeah, you get some ceiling, but you get less likelihood that you suffer an injury. And so there's different ways to think about that strategy. So every person's different. So think about your risk profile. Like, do you like to be more of a high risk, high reward type player? Or would you like to build a more stable roster that's more down the middle? If so, you probably should be thinking about receivers a little bit more. If you really still want to make sure you're swinging for the fences and you don't mind if you have an injury, but you just want to, if you're right, get to crush your league, an RB start like could be in your future, depending on how it plays out. But so from those first 3 spots, I would love to get JT or CMC if I can. if they're gone, I'm pivoting to Justin Jefferson. If you guys like Cooper Kupp more, it's okay. I've had Jefferson as my wide receiver 1 since I put out my first ranks. Like that's just, and now with even just a little bit of noise around Stafford, even though he's been a lot better over the last 2 weeks, seems like he's probably fine. Like I'm just going with the younger guy. But once you get to the middle position, so now you're looking at, like picks 5, 6, 7, 8 in that range. Really, the early positions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Is your middle position. In that range, I'm taking Austin Eckler. I'm taking Jamar Chase. Obviously, if Justin Jefferson falls down the board, and these are the guys we talked about, like you're going to take them. And then, like it's really up to you, right? This is where the strategy comes in. Like after those guys, like some people will even take like Travis Kelce that early, but I typically don't. I would rather have Stephon Diggs. He's in a really good offense, just like Kelce. He's going to be in a, it's pass heavy, has a good quarterback, but he's a younger talent. So, right, I love both players, but I'd rather go with the younger guy, even though Travis Kelce gets to play tight end. And plus, we'll talk about a couple other tight ends in a minute that I really love that you can get after this. So in that middle range, like I'm willing to pivot, to Diggs. I will typically take Diggs and guys like that ahead of Derrick Henry because of the risk profile of Derrick Henry. So Derrick Henry, I typically don't take him unless he falls into the second round, just because it de-risks it enough for me. I will acknowledge, like, he's 27 years old, like he's up there in his touches, but I will acknowledge you can go back in history and you can find guys that had as many carries as he did at this time, right? And we're going into this, age 27, it might even be 28 season, and they've blown up. Like Sean Alexander was a great example I saw. Like Sean Alexander went nuts in the same exact season, basically the same kind of workload going into this year that we have for Derrick Henry. But having said that, it's also still rare. Typically by this point, right, you're going to start to see wear and tear on these backs. He's got an injury to his foot. So I typically go with the receivers over Derrick Henry. But if you really, I will say with Henry, you have to understand, like, he was leading all of fantasy football in points per game last year when he got hurt. So we know the upside was there just as recently as one season ago, right? And they've been completely protecting him this preseason. Towards the end of the first round, Devontae Adams, is in play. I'm willing to go after CeeDee Lamb. So again, people know the first round for the most part. Like if you just want to know, like there's not a strict avoid for me in the first round. I don't draft Najee Harris typically, and I don't draft Derrick Henry in the first round. Everything else, all the players that typically go in the first round, that's fair game. I don't take Travis Kelce over Diggs. I don't take Travis Kelce over Devontae Adams. I don't take Travis Kelce usually over Saquon Barkley even. It's just, I like Kelce, but he is a little bit older. If you're playing tight end premium, that can change things a little bit for you.
Yeah, you and I actually had this exact same issue out at the Kings Classic. I had the 8th pick. You had the 10th pick. It's a 14-team draft. I took Kelce at 8, and you took Diggs at 10. I think it matters also if the size of your league. It was a 14-team league. I was trying to differentiate and be really strong at one spot, knowing I had a player coming back to me pretty quickly. So that's one thing you guys can think of with the tight end. If you want to go tight end early, could it leave you weaker at other positions? Potentially, but if you drafted Kelce, if you drafted Andrews, maybe you wait till the 3rd, 4th round, you get Kyle Pitts, it can be a real difference maker over the guy in your draft.
Just don't do it before the end of the first round. And I really don't think the league size matters too much, to be honest. Like, it doesn't change the values of the players, right? Because like all the other positions are going to get taken up just as quickly when you're in a 14-teamer versus a 12-teamer, right? Essentially, right, once you reach round 6, an extra round has already occurred, right? Because you have an extra 2 picks every round, but it's hitting all the positions, right? It doesn't make tight ends necessarily go faster. It doesn't make one position or the other go faster. What makes those players go faster is the format of your league. If you're playing in a league that you must start 3 receivers and you only get to play 2 running backs and you don't have a flex, receivers are going to fly off the board. You add flex in, that slows it down a little bit. You add 2 flexes in, right? Or if you only got to start 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs, 2 flex, that changes the dynamics of how many receivers are going to go in the first 4, 5, 6 rounds. So it's really paying attention to your league format, more so than the size of your league. Like, because if you're playing an 8-team, 10-team, 12-team, it doesn't really change the value of the players. You still want to get as many of the best players possible. But I think to your point earlier, what you really do want to understand as much as you can are your league mates, but don't try to make something up if it's not there. Sometimes your league mates are just random. And most of them still will be random. You're probably gonna have a couple people really well. He always takes quarterback early, blah blah blah. But again, like and that's, I think that's a good thing to understand about what they're going to try to do. But honestly, I don't ever assume that. I kind of let the board start to play out and see, are they going to follow the same pattern as last year or not? And then based on that first round or two, dude, by the time I'm done with my first 2 rounds, I pretty much know like what my targets are for like the next, 8 picks. And now like value is going to fall sometimes, and that changes the course, right, of what you're doing. But I've got a really good idea of like the groups of players that I'm going to be targeting almost every single round. And each round after I make my pick, right, you're kind of doing you're tweaking, right, what it's going to look like in the next few rounds.
It's good to have that scratch pad with you too, to kind of note these things down and say, hey, hey, I've got Kelsey here, like in the draft we did. And down the road, I want to ask you this too. It's not best ball. We've talked a ton about best ball in this show over the past few months, and people need to kind of break out of that mindset. But in a home league, regardless of PPR, half PPR, whatever, people are going to say, do I want to stack? When you get through your first round, say at the end of that first round, Dwain, you get Diggs, you get Kelsey. In a home league, are you more concerned about, I just want to get the best player, or do you say, you know what, maybe I do want to try to stack this player? So if you get a Mahomes and Kelsey, stack. If you get, Justin Herbert, you want to stack him with Mike Williams or Keenan Allen. Or in a home league, 12-team, half point, drinking in your beer with your garage with your buddies, you don't really care as much about that.
I don't care as much. Now, if it's there, I do it. I just don't reach to do it. I don't reach to do it on underdog, right? I mean, I might reach a little bit. Like if you landed a value, if you got Jamar Chase and you got T. Higgins, you might reach a little bit, to get your Joe Burrow. But at the same time, I try not to force it. I definitely don't in home leagues. I'm trying to get the best roster I can, but I think stacking can still be positive, right? If you get the right stacks, man, you can make things really hard on your league mates. It doesn't really matter what format you're playing in. If you hit the right ones, remember stacks are high variance. Like it can be really good or it can be really bad. So, if you hit the good one, you can win your league just on, a stack and a couple of other good players. So it's still something you can apply. Again, you just don't want to reach or build some strict sort of draft strategy around it. And then when you don't get it, like you just put yourself on tilt. Like, and remember, those are some things we've always talked about on this show, being prepared, right? Coming into your draft with just one single cheat sheet. This past weekend, I went into a dynasty, draft where it's super flex. We got IDP, and honestly, like I've been so busy creating content and working on redraft type stuff. I wasn't as organized as I usually was. And I was sitting next to one of my really good friends. I was like, this is why I tell people to be so organized going into their drafts. Cause like I was flipping back and forth between like 3 and 4 things. And I hated it. I hated the way I felt, like the whole draft. That's like whenever we share with people the way we draft, and we share like, the cheat sheet that we have up, then we've got the room with the board, right? So we know what's in the queue. We can read the queue that everybody else is reading because that influences everyone. We look at our ranks. We're looking at our tiers. Okay. How do we try to get 2 players out of this tier, not 1 player? And then we're looking up at the board to look at the players behind us. We've got, there's going to be 5 picks come off the board before it's our pick again. We're looking at those rosters and we're saying, okay, what's the best way? Like if I take X receiver here, what's the chance I get this tight end I want? Or what's the best way for me to get 2 receivers from this same tier? Did this with Ian the other day. We took Mike Thomas second. We talked about taking Mike Thomas with the first pick because he's ranked 20 in both of our rankings, but we let him go by because guess what? He was like 8 players down on the queue. And especially at somewhere like FFPC, where that queue is updating based on ADP, it's pretty accurate. People aren't reaching past it very often. So I believe it was Amon-Ra St. Brown we took at the end of that round, and then we let Michael Thomas come back around. Had we taken Michael Thomas first, guess what? We don't get Amon-Ra St. Brown. We wouldn't have got 2 players from that tier. So again, some high level things. I know we can get back into the rounds and the archetypes and the players, but being organized, just having a couple of things that you're looking at, knowing what your league mates are doing, what they have, having your tiers available, and then having your draft queue. Those 3 things are the only things I want, like, to be looking at during a draft. And if I'm looking at more and I'm flipping around, it's usually bad.
Remember, we had this conversation in Canton because I'm an old school guy. Like everybody else has their laptops out. I'm a pen and paper guy. I have my sheets, but I had multiple sheets out. So as they're naming off, and that draft was kind of going fast, it's like, all right, Allen Robinson, Javonte Williams, Leonard Fournette, Aaron, and it's just kind of going. And I'm trying to find names to cross off on 2 different sheets, and I'm missing guys, and it's not organized. So make it as streamlined as possible, folks. And you can go over to pff.com. You can download Dwain's rankings over there, or the whole staff. It's great content. They actually have a kick-ass draft app now. If you go over there, and Dwain, you can probably speak to that a little bit. You could pick where you're drafting from, and It's going to tell you who you think is valuable, or who you think is a value, who you think is a projected going to be available there. It's a very cool tool you guys have.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially, if you're drafting along, I mean, it's helping you. It's essentially, it's telling you who I would take, in each of these rounds, who my primary targets are. Yeah, and you can do it with Ian's data. You can do it with Nathan's. You can do it with Kevin Cole. You can do consensus. So the values are really the guys that could slip a little past ADP, because we don't want anyone to be looking at a list and they don't realize, oh crap, Tyreek Hill shouldn't be here, and they pass him, right? So that's what the values are. But then below are really the guys that are projected to be available based on ADP and then based on our ranks. So it's just telling you, okay, so based on this, here's where you would go. And then there's some commentary up top, just talking a little bit, about the middle rounds. It'll talk to you about the quarterbacks and how you need to be thinking about that. There's also some commentary about, if you go running back, just different things that honestly come mostly from all the strategy articles that I've written, this offseason.
And if you're watching on YouTube, and why wouldn't you be? You should be subscribed over at Fantasy Football Hustle. You can actually see, I'm showing it right now. We're not going to show it the whole show because we want you to go over to pff.com, use promo code HUSTLE and sign up. But you can see right now, I have it on pick number 10, and we're going into the second round now of players that we like. And you can see it's going to say the targets here are CeeDee Lamb and Saquon Barkley. Dwain projects to be available: Kelsey, Mixon, Fournette, Aaron Jones. So that's kind of where we're going to start things as we go into the second round now. And, we started things out. Let's say, Dwain, we went in the first round, we got ourselves a running back. I think a lot of people feel good when they come out of that first round with that anchor running back. Now we're into round 2. Give me some players that we like, that archetype you always talk about. How are we going to start building this roster in round 2?
Yeah. So it's pretty much, when you look at that Barkley, CeeDee Lamb thing, those are my centerpiece players for round 2. Those are the 2 players I'm trying to get every draft that I can in round 2. And so if you started with a receiver, say you were pick 11 and you got Stephon Diggs, then great. You turn around and you come back with Barkley. But guess what? If you want to go Lamb there because you're just worried about Barkley's injuries, you can. And we can talk about what would happen in round 3 whenever you come back down. Let's say you started with Jamar Chase from pick 6. You're going to have a chance at Barkley coming back to you in the middle of round 2, especially in your home leagues. If you're playing in some of these sharper leagues, Barkley will still fall into that range sometimes. But typically, at this point, he's an early second round pick. The days of we used to get Barkley in round 3. Now he's moved all the way up to the early round 2. Honestly, I would have no problem taking Saquon Barkley at the end of the first round. Look, it's a 26-year-old back that's going to have an every down role that is now fully recovered from an injury. Last year, he was almost recovered from his injury. Then he had the stupid ankle, issue, that he picked up in the Cowboy game. He really just didn't look like himself. So look, maybe he won't be as explosive as he was, but my thought is on Barkley. His floor is Najee Harris, as long as he's healthy. Najee's not explosive either. Barkley's going to get the same workload as Najee Harris if he's healthy, and he's going to score as many fantasy points as Najee Harris. That I think is Barkley's floor. However, if Saquon Barkley, if his explosiveness does return, which is very possible at his age and how hard he's worked at this, his upside is RB1 overall. That's what you're potentially getting with Saquon Barkley. CeeDee Lamb's the same thing. He just barely missed being in the same tier that I have Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, and Jamar Chase. He just hasn't quite demanded the same targets per route run. Hasn't come through as quite as many big plays as what we've seen with Jamar Chase, but Lamb is now, he's the main guy. They're going to scheme more looks. He could get an extra 10% in target shares just from schemed looks, right? Used to, it was Dak drop back and just whichever guy's open because they have so many guys. So now he could get more of a benefit of, getting looks more like what a Debo or a Tyreek Hill, some of the things that those guys get. And if he just is on the field for 90% of the routes, he's never even been out there over 77% of the time because the Cowboys rotate receivers so much. He's going to pick up 10 to 13% extra routes. That alone is going to make CeeDee Lamb valuable. So Lamb could also end up as the wide receiver 2, the wide receiver 3. So those are the 2 players that I love the most in the second round. I don't have a problem with DeAndre Swift either. I'm fine with him. Alvin Kamara, the more we look at it and the less likely it is that he's going to be suspended, that's a great pick in the second round. Javonte Williams is a player that we've talked about a lot. He does come with more risk because we don't know for sure what they're going to do with Melvin Gordon. We have our gut feel. At the end of the day, I think it's still going to be 60-40. Last year, it was basically 50-50. I don't think it's going to be 70-30, though. I think Melvin Gordon's definitely going to be involved, but in a really good offense, you're betting on the talent. And remember, upside if you hit the ceiling of Javonte's outcomes, he could be a top 3 back. That could give you a top 3 scorer overall in fantasy football this year. And that's the thing that, like, when people are I don't want to take him because Melvin Gordon. Like, you have to remember where the biggest upside cases come from in fantasy, and it is still the running backs. And Javonte checks a lot of the things we want. Very talented back as far as missed tackles forced, explosive rush rate, yards after contact. Like, he grades in the same range as Nick Chubb and Jonathan Taylor. Yeah, I get it. Maybe he doesn't have the same vision, but at the same time, like, when you're a badass in college and you're just running over people and you can go to the corner every time, like, maybe you didn't need your vision. And so for me, like, what if all of a sudden Javonte Williams has really good vision now? What if, like, he matures, in that way? Like, vision is something that, Ian and I had Matt Waldman on. He talked about it. It's a skill that backs can craft. And a lot of times it takes them a little time when they get to the league because they have to adjust. And so I think there's still a really high ceiling, for Javonte Williams. So those are all options, in that round. Aaron Jones is another one, we didn't talk about, but goodness, like, folks, we don't need to talk about the splits without Devontae Adams. People know how nuts it is, but like this, he could be the wide receiver 2, he might be the wide receiver 1 on the Packers this year, but like, he could easily see an Alvin Kamara type season. That's what we could see from Aaron Jones. Obviously, AJ Dillon's going to be involved. AJ Dillon's probably going to, take a lot of the work on the ground. But remember, Alvin Kamara, even was a rookie, didn't even get to 30% of the rushing attempts for his team and scored over 300 fantasy points because he was involved in that passing game. And so I think that's a possibility for Aaron Rodgers. Man, there's a lot of stuff to love in round 2. The guys that I'm not taking, Drake, just real quick in round 2, I'm really not in on Joe Mixon. I like him, but like, the explosiveness is really gone. He's really dependent on scoring the touchdowns. Now, he plays in a good offense now. So
better offensive line this year.
They have a better offensive line. He could come through with 15 touchdowns. I just struggle because he doesn't really have a role in the passing game, whereas you get the guys like Barkley, Swift. So PPR standard league, you should like Joe Mixon a lot more. You go look at my standard ranks over on PFF versus PPR, and you'll see, like, there's a big difference for Joe Mixon between those two. But whenever you look at him in PPR, man, it's just tough. Like, because you have, and again, it's because of the archetype of the other guys available. DeAndre Swift catches passes. Saquon Barkley catches passes. Alvin Kamara catches passes. Aaron Jones catches passes. Like, those guys are all explosive and they catch passes. So honestly, I like all of those guys over Joe Mixon. And usually I have to worry about it. Like, ADP also calculates into the way I think about it. But Mixon's a player that I'm typically not taking in the second round. Like, he's the main one that I'm typically just not taking. Everyone else I have some exposure to, but definitely Barkley and Lamb are like my 2 primary targets. So that's the
2 guys. I'll tell you a couple guys I'm scared of in round 2. Mark Andrews, and we all know the numbers he put up last year. Most of those numbers, though, as if you're on Twitter, you know this, most of them happened without Lamar Jackson. Now, I'm wondering, they have this new kid Likely who's going to be out on the field, another rookie tight end. I could see them playing a lot of 12 personnel this year. I don't know if either one of those 2 guys can play in line. I think that's more of maybe a Nick Boyle role, but Mark Andrews kind of scares me. I want to see how he plays with Lamar Jackson under center. Deebo Samuel's another guy, Dwayne, who kind of scares me because I know he just got paid. We don't know how much he's going to run out of the backfield. They did draft Tyrion Davis-Price to kind of take some of the work off Elijah Mitchell, who's already hurt. And I don't know how he reacts well with Trey Lance. We don't know how a good passer Trey Lance is going to be. Everyone's talking about Brandon Ayuk coming on more this year. Those are 2 guys. If I can avoid them in the second round, I think there's just better options. And you know what I do love in the second round that you have here on your list? T. Higgins. If I can skip over Jamar Chase in the first round and maybe take a Dalvin Cook, and you can come back and get T. Higgins, who, oh, by the way, last year averaged 15.7 points per game in a PPR. Like, the drop-off is not that great, and you don't have to spend the first-round capital that you did on Jamar Chase. So just a few of my thoughts out there. Not that anyone cares, but hey, if I got the microphone for me, I'm going to give some takes too.
I like Mark Andrews fine. I've already seen what Mark Andrews can do with Lamar Jackson, and it's been good. I mean, just so I don't know. I'm not going to get all wound up in the splits just from last year. If I go to the splits the year before with Lamar Jackson, the year before that, like Mark Andrews on a per route basis kicked ass. Last year, Mark Andrews saw the most routes he's ever seen. I would expect him and Lamar to completely work that out. I like Isaiah Likely as well. I don't think he's going to really carve out anything from Mark Andrews, though. Like I think Mark Andrews, I love Mark Andrews in the second round. I don't like taking him early in the second round, but late in the second round, I think Mark Andrews is still a really good pick.
And we'll talk about some more tight ends going forward, and we won't share this the whole day. We want you to go over and sign up. That's the whole point of the show. So let's move on into round 3. So everybody can get a cheat sheet. They can draft the first 2 rounds. That's not difficult. When you get into round 3, now I think you start making more decisions. Now you kind of got to know teams. You got to know who's the quarterback for these wide receivers. What's maybe the offensive line situation with these guys? Do I want to maybe pull the trigger on a Kyle Pitts right here? One of the guys in the 3rd round is A.J. Brown. And if you can get him early in the 2nd round, reports out of Eagles camp is they're just glowing as how much he's dominating the football. Jalen Hurts looks a lot better. Yes, I'm an Eagles homer, but I think A.J. Brown this year is going to have an outstanding year. And Travis Etienne, you talk about archetypes, Dwayne. We mentioned on the show before, here's a kid who's going to be in this Doug Peterson offense. He's going to be catching passes. He's going to be on a team that, let's be honest, probably going to stink. So they're going to be behind all the time. I love, especially in a home league, I think you can get Travis Etienne maybe late 3rd, who he might come early 4th round in some home leagues.
In home leagues, you can get Etienne in round 4, round 5.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So you can wait, but yeah, round 3 is where it starts to get interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I like A.J. Brown. He typically goes, towards the middle, of the 3rd round, but you have Travis Etienne as an option, for running backs. I'm staying away from Nick Chubb. I like Michael Pittman. I like T. Higgins. Even DJ Moore, towards the end of the round is fine. I'm not taking Ezekiel Elliott in round 3. That's where he goes in home leagues right now. Like I'm staying away from that. Even Cortland Sutton, I like, but like he's creeping into the 3rd round now. And it's like, man, like Jerry Jeudy's still good. So I don't know. I like Sutton. I like him. I liked him better when he was a 4th round pick than being a 3rd round pick. Sutton's got an okay breakout profile. It's not great though. Sutton has never done anything great. Sutton has done a good thing one season, but he's never truly shown like elite chops before. Now he is playing with Russell Wilson. I get it. I think people immediately just think, oh, well, that means he's DK Metcalf. Cortland Sutton's not DK Metcalf. That's the problem, right? Cortland Sutton's a really good player, but again, I'm fine with it. If somebody wants to take him there, you can do it. But the 3rd round, like if you're looking at early position and say you started with, Christian McCaffrey, right? And then you came back in the 2nd round and you got a Javonte Williams. Like in the 3rd round, like I'm really trying to get a T. Higgins, right? Or I'm going with Kyle Pitts. I think Kyle Pitts, the thing you have to remember is like, I think essentially what you could have from Pitts this season, he could match the stat lines of A.J. Brown, Michael Pittman, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Cortland Sutton. He could match their stat lines and he plays tight end. And they're using him inside now. In the first game of the preseason, he had 10 snaps, 9 of them. Only 1 of them he lined up wide receiver. Last year, they put him out wide all the time. He only had 51% of his targets came against linebackers or safeties, where he's a complete mismatch. Cooper Kupp had more targets against linebackers and safeties than Kyle Pitts did. So now they're moving Pitts inside. He's going to have these mismatches against guys that just cannot hang with him. I think Kyle Pitts is an absolute freaking smash in round 3. I love it. I think the other one is still Travis Etienne. Now he's slipping down a little bit because of, we hear James Robinson's going to be back. But in my projections for Etienne, I'm already assuming James Robinson's getting 40 to 50% of the early down work. My assumption for Travis Etienne, he's going to see 35 to 40% of the rushing attempts, and he's going to take the passing down work. Now, this last weekend, we saw Snoop Connor come in with a 2-minute offense. He took that. So I think some people are worried about it. I don't know quite how to read that, to be honest. I mean, at that point, like Travis Etienne already had 25 snaps with the starters. They may have just been done. They may have just been like, dude, get him off the field. What are we doing here? Let's get Snoop Connor out there, let him have some run. And he ran the 2-minute offense. But I will say, if Etienne doesn't get the passing down work, it's going to suck. It's going to be, because you want the passing down work on a team that's going to be trailing all the time.
If Etienne doesn't get the passing down work, why do they draft him? He's got to get the work, He's got it.
You're just going to have to bet on it, but at the end of the day, in your home leagues, you don't have to spend a 3rd round pick on Travis Etienne. An FFPC, NFFC, you do. If you're playing over, on Yahoo, you're playing over on ESPN, you can get Travis Etienne in round 4, or round 5. And so it just depends on the way your build goes. Like if you started, so for example, if you started Stephon Diggs and you took CeeDee Lamb in the 1st round or 1st and 2nd round, like Travis Etienne is a big target for you coming back in round 3. And he's part of what allows you to start that way on that end. And like, so I've done that with Ian as well. Like we started off with Jamar Chase and Stephon Diggs, and we got Travis Etienne, like from that position. Another draft, we had Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, and Travis Etienne from that position. Another draft, we had Stephon Diggs, CeeDee Lamb, I believe, and Travis Etienne. So it's like we've kind of made every mix we can, of getting those two elite receivers and then coming back with Etienne. Look, it's essentially an arbitrage play on DeAndre Swift, right? It's again, like the Lions last year, gonna be losing a lot. We've got Trevor Lawrence checks the ball down more than any other quarterback in the league. His receivers did improve. I expect that to change some. But Travis Etienne playing underneath, he's just going to have this automatic space just there for him, especially, against zone coverages and stuff. So I think Etienne's in a really good spot, in the third round. And so my three favorite players to draft in round 3 are T. Higgins, Kyle Pitts, Travis Etienne. But again, you're starting to hear how this plays out. This is not just talking through the rounds. It's the draft plan. Like, you could have started from first position, running back, receiver, running back, receiver, tight end, running back, receiver, running back, tight end, middle position. You could have had any of those starts as well. Late position, you could have started with Saquon Barkley and DeAndre Swift from pick 12. Like, if you want 2 pass catching backs, you could have done that. You could have done Saquon Barkley and Alvin Kamara and come back in round 3, right? And you get Kyle Pitts. So there's so many different ways like that you can start in these first 3 rounds, but getting into rounds 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that's where it really gets interesting. We have to start talking about the things that you want to be avoiding, and we can kind of reverse engineer. Like, if you started this way, like, you really need to be thinking. So like, if you look at round 4, just to kind of kick it off, Drake, let's say you did start receiver. You really need Etienne or Breece Hall. Like, that's what you're looking for. And again, there's risk with those players, but they're the archetype. They are explosive pass catching backs that give us the upside ceiling that we have traditionally seen from backs that finish as the RB1 overall. So again, we're looking for that huge ceiling. Also, if they're in committees, if they can stay on the field in passing downs and they're on teams that trail and you're playing in a PPR league, that gives them additional outs. If they're explosive, they don't have to always be inside the 5 to score their touchdowns. That gives them more outs. That's why we're always talking about the guys that can catch the passes that are also explosive playmakers, because if things go wrong with their team, they are insulated from those things. But then when things break right, and if all of a sudden they really do just take over the backfield, like with ETN, what if James Robinson just isn't any good anymore? And what if Snoop Conner is just really, a late round rookie pick, and all of a sudden Travis Etienne gets 70% of the work? Like, his ceiling is RB1 overall. Like, even if he's not a great player, like, his ceiling is RB1 overall. So Breece Hall's the same way. So I'm really trying to get one of those two. If I did not get a running back in the first 3 rounds, those are my primary targets at running back in round 4.
Does it matter to you when we're looking at some of these teams? And you did a fantastic article about the AFC, NFC West and the points scored, and how Vegas thinks those teams in those divisions are going to just blow up this year. When you're looking at your roster and you're all of a sudden in this round, you're like, I need running backs. And you're looking at David Montgomery, Bears are going to be terrible. You're looking at ETN, team could be terrible. Even in, go down to like a DJ Moore, team could be terrible. Like, how much Vegas, Josh Jacobs, for God only knows what reason, Josh Jacobs is the player at 46 right now. But do you look at that and should our listeners be aware of these bad teams and trying to stay away from teams that stink?
Well, we've talked about it. I don't want my whole team to be loaded with those guys for sure, right? I don't want to look down at my roster and be like, oh, I've got DJ Moore. Oh, I've also got Terry McLaurin. Oh, I've also got like DK Metcalf. Like, I don't want all those 3 on my same team. I don't want those 3 on my same team. I'm fine though mixing in those guys, right? I just don't want them all. At the end of the day, like, all you need is at least a decent quarterback to survive as a receiver. And so DJ Moore got enough of an upgrade. Baker is not great, but he's enough of an upgrade. We can feel okay about him standalone. Carson Wentz hopefully is enough, right, for Terry McLaurin. What you have to avoid, you just can't have the terrible quarter. You can't have Geno Smith and Drew Lock. That's what you have to avoid if you're a really good receiver. And so Deontay Johnson could be in a similar situation too. We don't know. I'm kind of like, at this point, hoping Kenny Pickett wins the job, because it sounds like he's just looking a lot better than Mitch Trubisky. But we have at least seen Mitch Trubisky support Allen Robinson in the past, right? So that's good for Deontay. So again, I don't want those players all on the same team. And I'll be honest, like, as you get into this, 4th round, of wide receivers, it also gets kind of flat. There's a lot of guys that we like. But to your point, you don't want to look down and just have a whole ton of guys like all that are from bad teams.
I'm looking, let's say, beginning of the 5th round in a 12-team league. That's pick 49. So I'm over here at Fantasy Pros looking at ADP. We're going to go 5th round through 6th round. So that's 72. Dwain, we're in the running back dead zone right here. This is a lot of guys that you might not want to take.
I'm pretty much avoiding all of these at this point. Like some of them, like even the ones that people are pushing up the board because they don't think they traditionally fit like the dead zone running back theory. Cam Akers, I think, you're still getting access to the Rams offense. Like you're just hoping he gets the volume though. We still don't know what the split's going to look like with Darrell Henderson. Like we don't know. J.K. Dobbins in a backfield that traditionally loves to rotate players coming off a massive injury. Right now, Gus Edwards is even further behind him. Gus Edwards is at least not playing the first 4 games. Dobbins normally, like being he was an explosive playmaker as a rookie. He'd be a guy that we'd look at, but like I'm not that excited about J.K. Dobbins in round 5. David Montgomery is just a guy. He could lose his job to Khalil Herbert this year. He's projected for the volume, but not really interested. A.J. Dillon, I like. And yes, he can catch passes, but he's not a dynamic down the field pass catcher. He is, everybody's covered. I'm going to check it down to my 3rd read, which could be quite often with the receivers, right, that the Packers have when A.J. Dillon is on the field. I just struggle to see a really big upside for Dillon to pay off, like even his round 5 ADP right now. Like I was more on board with Dillon when he was round 6. Now we're talking about him moving up to round 5. In home leagues, you can get him a little bit, later than that, but that's where he's going, in some of these mid-stake, high-stake drafts. A.J. Dillon is really pushed up. Josh Jacobs don't want anything to do with in that round. Like Josh Jacobs honestly should be going the same. You can get the same thing in round 9. It's called Damian Harris. It's the lead back, on an offense. He's going to score some touchdowns. But Amir Abdul is going to take the passing down work, right? And then you're going to have Zamir White rotating in. And if Josh Jacobs gets hurt, like he often does, and Zamir White really flashes, Zamir White could just take his job. So I don't want Josh Jacobs. Tony Pollard in the 6th round, no thanks. I have Tony Pollard in a tier of backs that you're really supposed to be targeting, but not until round 7. Like I'm not taking Tony Pollard in round 6. Elijah Mitchell, at least you can get him at the end of round 6, and you can make a case like how explosive he was. But at the end of the day, like they're going to use a committee. They drafted another back in the 3rd round. Trey Sermon is looking good. You're going to put Debo back there. They got JaMychal Hasty taking all the 2-minute work in the preseason. So Elijah Mitchell is not going to catch a lot of passes. I'm just much more likely to be taking receivers in that range, or I'm pivoting to the quarterback. When you get to those spots like that, right? Oh, well, I could take, Elijah Mitchell or Alan Lazard. The answer is just no, don't take either. Take Kyler Murray, take Lamar Jackson, get one of those players. So take Jalen Hurts. Even if the other 2 are gone, I would take Jalen Hurts over both those players in a heartbeat because you are differentiating your team in a different way, right? You're getting a top 6 dual threat quarterback that has QB1 overall upside. And you don't, there's a lot of guessing going on with what's going to happen with Alan Lazard and Elijah Mitchell. They're just, and again, it's opportunity costs. It's what it's costing you to take those players. The rosters I've built that I love the most, I'm not touching any of that mess.
It's funny when I look at drafts now in home leagues, and we often think, oh, well, the quarterbacks go so early in home leagues. And I think people have sort of adopted that, well, let's wait on the quarterback. And I've seen it even in my own league where people will say, you know what, we're going to play quarterback chicken. But once they start going off the board, it's an avalanche. It's this tsunami of quarterbacks that just start coming off the board. So let's say you're in that dead zone and you're in that flat area of wide receivers, like Dwain just mentioned, and maybe you can pull the trigger on Lamar, who's going 49 overall, Kyler 56 overall, Jalen Hurts 66 overall. Or you're like, well, let me see who else is here in this range. Like Dwain was talking about it. Damian Harris, Amari Cooper, give me a break. Dalton Schultz. Are you okay with maybe pulling the trigger a little earlier to get one of these dual threat upside quarterbacks where maybe people had this antiquated thought of, no, I got to wait forever. I'm just going to get the last QB on the board. Like you got to get somebody that runs.
I don't think you have to reach. I think you can still read the board, right? You want one of them, right? Mm-hmm. So if it gets to me in the middle of round 6 and Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, and Jalen Hurts are all still available, I'm probably going to let it go by and take Elijah Moore, something like that, and know that one of them is going to come back to me in round 7. And my backup plan being that if it doesn't, I'm probably going to pivot to Trey Lance in round 8. Right. So again, I've already thought multiple steps ahead. If it gets to me in round 6 and Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray are already off the board, I'm probably just going to go ahead and take Jalen Hurts, right, and call it a day. And then whatever comes back to me in round 7, I'll figure that out. Is it going to probably be Chase Edmonds? Just to throw it out there. Like Chase Edmonds is a back I would rather draft than all these guys going ahead of him. Honestly, Chase Edmonds, you can make an argument like he's basically you're getting Breece Hall in round 7. You might be getting Travis Etienne in round 7.
That's
People
a
have been
great
so
point.
stubborn
God,
on
let's hope he
coming
can stay
around.
healthy.
Yeah, people are so stubborn on coming around on Chase Edmonds. Explosive playmaker. If you look at his carries of 15 plus yards or more last year, great. He's involved in the passing game, and he's going to be involved in an explosive offense with playmakers all around him creating space. Chase Edmonds could just go absolutely berserk. I would draft Chase Edmonds if somebody forced me. They said it's round 5 and you have to take J.K. Dobbins or Chase Edmonds. I'll just take Chase Edmonds. Screw ADP. I don't care. I'm just taking Chase Edmonds over J.K. Dobbins. I'll take him over David Montgomery, take him over Cam Akers, take him over A.J. Dillon, take him over Josh Jacobs twice on Sunday, take him over Tony Pollard. I'd take him over Elijah Mitchell. But I don't have to. I get to wait till round 7. And also when I create my ranks and I put them over on the site, I use ADP as an anchor so folks don't make that reach, right? So go ahead and let these other backs go off the board, get the quarterback, get the receivers, and then you come back and you get the ace up your sleeve with a guy like Chase Edmonds. We also talked about Kareem Hunt, explosive pass catching back. Cordarrelle Patterson. Yeah, he's older, but guess what? Not a lot of tread on the tires. He's only played 1 snap in each of the 2 preseason games. It's as the starter. They've got him in bubble wrap, folks, because he's one of the top 3 players on the team. And so Cordarrelle Patterson, he's going to catch balls. He's going to make explosive plays. Last year, he got a high ankle sprain and he tailed off at the end of the year. And everybody just says, oh, Cordarrelle Patterson sucked. He got hurt. Like he had a high ankle sprain. Like that's what happened. And he came back the next week and had a good week. So people just assumed he was better. But that kind of thing can just really, it can derail your season. So Patterson's there.
Would you say
I think I'm reading the board on the
7,
quarterbacks.
Would you say this round 6, 7, let's say 7, you mentioned sweet spots and you mentioned Chase Edmonds. Would you say after we take a break, maybe in 4, 5, 6, coming back in 7, we start to find some sweet spots on the Cordarrelle Pattersons, the Chase Edmonds of the world? So that's kind of when you can say, all right, let's look back at the running back here.
Yeah,
what are some of your sweet spots in the draft?
Yeah, it's these rounds I'm talking about. 7, 8, and 9, 7 and 8 especially. Chase Edmonds, Dameon Pierce, Kareem Hunt, Cordarrelle Patterson. You could throw Ramondre Stevenson in there. He's gotten a bit steamed, in my opinion, for a backfield that's just always been a 3-way rotation. And again, I'm seeing a lot of comments, from folks like, oh, I'm not taking ETN. Oh, Patterson, Chase Edmonds got to share. It doesn't matter. You want the back. You want explosive backs that catch balls. That's the path. And guess what? When they end up surprising you and they get more role than you thought, those are the guys with upside to be a top 6 running back, right? If they don't, it's the things we already talked about. They're so insulated, in their roles in a PPR format. If you're playing standard, you're going to move some of these guys down. But most people play PPR or half PPR. And so these are guys that you absolutely want to be targeting. If you started 0 wide receiver, like this is it. This is what you're doing. By the time you get to round 6, and if you want to, in that case, you could reach on Tony Pollard, right? You could go receiver, or receiver, tight end, receiver. You come back and you go ahead and grab your upside with Pollard. Then you grab Chase Edmonds. Then you come back and you grab Cordarrelle Patterson or Kareem Hunt, right? You got all 3 of those. Now remember, you still got to get your quarterback too. So if you're drafting in a home league, you can still get Trey Lance in round 9. And if you got Kyle Pitts in round 3, that's how you go 0 RB this year. You get 2 receivers, you come back with Kyle Pitts, you grab 2 more receivers, and then you come back with Pollard, Chase Edmonds, and a guy like Kareem Hunt. And you're just trying to start 2 of them. You've already said you're flexing receiver. You took freaking 4, and you've already got a good tight end. And then if you get Trey Lance, you have a potential top 6 quarterback. So now you've got not only, did you insulate yourself from running back injuries by going receivers early, but you got the right archetype of backs later that can still pop the top. If they don't, they're still going to be good enough to not kill you in your lineup with all those really good receivers, plus Trey Lance, plus Kyle Pitts. So, yeah. And look, again, we're talking about all the value that starts to squeeze in these rounds. Like we're talking round 7 is Jalen Hurts. Round 8 is Trey Lance. All the running backs we just talked about. A lot of the young receivers are going in this range. You can get Kadarius Toney with huge upside going, in this range. You got Sky Moore, Chris Olave, George Pickens. Traylon Burks is sliding, but look, he's still a guy, but by week 5, people could love him, right? I mean, look, he's got off to a slow start, but if you're looking for upside at receiver, it's all here for the taking. I will say in home leagues, Drake, it's very easy to start heavy on running back and just take receivers because Allen Robinson goes like 20 picks later than he does at FFPC. Cortland Sutton goes like 20 picks later than he does over at FFPC. Michael Thomas goes like 15 picks later than he does at FFPC. Like all of these receivers just go too late in home leagues. Like I could easily see myself starting with 2 running backs and a Kyle Pitts, or 3 running backs and coming back with a George Kittle or a Darren Waller. I love George Kittle and Darren Waller in round 4 and 5. Like, so I'm trying to come away with one of these elite tight ends. If I miss them, Dallas Goedert is your play, and you can typically get him in round 7 or 8. So again, you got to base it on the way you've built your draft. If you don't have a tight end, Dallas Goedert is going to be a priority for you in round 7 or 8. If you don't have your quarterback yet, right, Jalen Hurts and Trey Lance are a priority in round 7 and 8. You don't have your running backs yet, Chase Edmonds, Damian Pierce, Kareem Hunt, Cordell Patterson. They're going to be your priorities in round 7 or 8. So you got to be thinking through the way that you've built out your team so that, you can really put out the best squad possible. And again, it's not just about trying to fill a starting lineup. You may have already drafted 2 backups at receiver by the time you do some of these things, and that's fine. You can do that. You just want to load up with as many players as you can. But again, you have to be thinking multiple steps ahead. Dallas Goedert, I love in round 7 and 8. He has the profile, his underlying data points, yards per route run, targets per route run, PFF receiving grade. They look like George Kittle. They look like Darren Waller. They look like Mark Andrews. But you're getting him in round 7 and 8 because people think the Eagles are going to be pass heavy. And it's rightfully so. You worry about Jalen Hurts as a passer, and it could be a crowded offense. You got Devontae Smith, you got A.J. Brown, but it doesn't matter. To bust loose as a tight end, you have to have the talent. You don't typically have just a meh tight end that gets a lot of volume that busts into the top 3 or has a bonker season. Remember back to the days, even like whenever we would see this with Vernon Davis, and his efficiency years would hit, right? And he would just explode like through the roof. Then you have the years where you didn't get as much of Vernon Davis, but he had the ability to hit that ceiling because, right, he was such an athlete and he was such a good player. So that's what you get with Dallas Goedert. So again, those in rounds, 7 through 9, if you're at tight end, it's Goddard. If you're at quarterback, it's Hurts and it's Lance. If you're talking about the running backs, we've already named them. And so just make sure that, like, if you need multiple things from those, areas, like that you're thinking through it. And that way, okay, I'm going to go ahead and take Dallas. I'm picking at the end of round 7, and maybe Dallas Goedert, typically goes in like round 8, right? And you're drafting an ESPN, but you look behind you and you're picking 10th, and you see both teams behind you don't have a tight end yet. That's when you just say, I'm going to go ahead and take Dallas Goedert then round 7. Great. Like, I may take him 4 spots early, but I feel good about what I'm going to get coming back, based on the way my roster is constructed at a different position. It might be Kareem Hunt, right? It might be one of the running backs, but you're sitting there looking at it and you're like, well, I need a running back and I need a tight end. Goddard's the last one in your tier. You look at your running back tier and you see 4 guys that you like. Take Goddard, let the running back come back, right? Those are the little things that you've got to do.
I love the way you put that. That was, if you guys can take 5 minutes of this show right there, that's the clip. The last 5 minutes of what Dwain just said, that was really gold. And I love what you talked about with the running back theory, because to put it into practice, folks, I did a draft like that. I shared it with Dwain earlier. Delvin Cook, Javonte Williams, and James Conner. Those are my first 3 backs. 1, 2, 3. You're like, well, Drake, you're probably going to stink at wide receiver. Okay, well, my receivers are Deontay Johnson, Allen Robinson, Gabe Davis. Still have Damian Pierce on the team. Tight end is Dalton Schultz, and I got Trey Lance. So, I mean, you really can do it. And I love what you said about Goddard. Guys like Goddard, and Lance, those are kind of like your backstops. Like, if all else fails, break the glass, you got to take those guys, because after that, it gets pretty hairy. And now you're looking down the board at the Dawson Knoxes and the Cole Kmets and the Freiermuths of the world. And at quarterback, it's guys who don't really run. And at that case, especially at tight end, now you're just praying for a touchdown every other week. And now you're just playing the streaming game. So get somebody you feel good about and you can start every single week. Kelsey, Andrews, Pitts, Kittle, Waller. We love Goddard this year, but God almighty, unless it's a tight end premium, I can't get down the board. I can't be playing Irv Smith and Noah Fant in leagues this year.
Yeah, it's tough. it's tough down there. Like, and if you miss, that's what you got to do. You got to go grab Irv Smith, and you got to grab a couple you got to grab like Irv Smith and David Njoku. Like, you got to give yourself a chance to hit some upside. And you don't want to be drafting 2 tight ends in a home league, right? Mm-hmm. Most likely you're just going to draft 1. If you're playing in a deep, tight end premium type format, you will. But again, like I see a lot of comments in the chat about, well, projected points per game. I don't care. I really don't. I throw all of that out. I'm looking for archetype backs based on historical, top performers. And that's the way I'm building out my rosters. We're going to be right on some of these. We're going to be wrong on some of these, but I'm getting off of player takes. Like, I want to go after archetypes. I want to go after the right profiles of the right types of players. Again, we will hit on some, we won't hit on some. But at the end of the day, like, it's not rocket science. Like, we've seen it over and over and over again. And so I get it. Like, a lot of people want to be like, well, I got, Travis Etienne down for 10 points a game. Like, okay, great. And here's the deal. Like, in my projections, I'm already giving Travis Etienne. I'm giving 50% of the carries away to James Robinson, and Travis Etienne still grades out in a PPR league as a late 3rd rounder, early 4th rounder. Like, that's where he should be going. So it's just a situation where, like, you gotta like fully embrace the full range of outcomes that can happen with these players. You can't be stuck on their median. You cannot be stuck on like the way you're projecting them. Like, I project players, I do projections. Like, I've done shows just on how to do projections. I've written articles on how to do projections. Like, so I love them. They're near and dear to my heart, but the process I go through doing the projections is actually more valuable than the projection itself, because it just forces you to really learn and understand these players. And then what that helps you do is really consider what is the true range of outcomes, for them. So those are the things just to be thinking about. And again, not to say, again, projections matter. I do them, I love them. Like I said, I've spent a lot of time on them, but at the end of the day, like, a projection is not a number that's going to help you win your fantasy league. It's just not. Like, you have to be thinking differently than that, especially if you're going to go play in some of these high stakes contests and you're going to try to beat some of the best players in the world. Like, it's just not going to cut it.
You know what I love? Somebody said this online and I took it to heart, and they said, draft as if you are right. Draft as if all your preconceived notions about this player for 2022 are right, because that's when you draft Saquon Barkley. Could Saquon Barkley get hurt? Sure. Any of these guys could get hurt. We didn't think Derrick Henry was going to get hurt, and then he did. So Travis Etienne, we talk about archetypes. Who is Travis Etienne? Who could he possibly be? Think about Reggie Bush when he was killing it, and he was a top 10 PPR running back. That's who he is. That's what we're shooting for. We're not hoping and saying, oh, he's 2020 Nyheim Hines. No, we're saying he's going to be a really good player. Draft as if you're right. Draft, shoot for the moon. We're trying to win. We're trying to be exceptional. We're not trying to be mediocre at fantasy football. We want big ass trophies. We want to cash checks. We don't want to come in 5th place. So that's what we're trying to do here. So Dwain, we got through 7, 8 rounds. So as we kind of go deeper into the draft, it kind of gets real muddy. Now you're 38 White Claws deep. The wife's calling you. You got to go home. Some guys throwing up in the bushes at the home league draft. So maybe we can consolidate some of the later rounds with some do's, some don'ts, some players or archetypes you're trying to get in these later rounds. People you just want to leave a draft with after probably the 8th, 9th, 10th round. We're getting double digits.
Yeah, I mean, so once you get to around 9, 10, 11, there's still, a lot to like depending on the way that you've built your roster. So for example, if you went with a hero RB, that's one running back in the first 2 rounds. And then maybe you came back and you grabbed a Chase Edmonds, but then you had to grab your quarterback and you grabbed Goddard, or something like that. And so you need some more backs. There's a lot of backs here with major contingent upside. You've got Darrell Henderson. You've got Alexander Madison. Nyheim Hines now has more upside than we thought, because if Jonathan Taylor goes down, it looks like Nyheim Hines he's not going to get 70% of the work. The other night in the first 2 drives, he played 100%. Philip Lindsay didn't even see the field. Nyheim Hines was out there just the whole time. I still think, they probably cap him at like 50%, but essentially then what you get with Nyheim Hines is if JT goes down, now you've got that Travis Etienne profile. You've got that Breece Hall profile. You've got, that guy that can catch passes in a PPR, and he's an explosive playmaker. And so again, depending on the way that you've built your roster, there's a lot of options here, but if you're light on running back, you can get the upside guys. And some of these guys are starting to slide a little bit in ADP, but Rachaad White, still, we know, even though he's a rookie, it's going to take some time probably for him to get on the field. But again, he fits the archetype. If something happens to Fournette, we know he is a pass catching back. Gio Bernard is there's a good chance like he could be cut, from this roster. So we'll have to see some things, but you're still giving yourself outs. Michael Carter is another one. We've already talked about Breece Hall. Well, Michael Carter is going to be very valuable if something happens to Breece Hall. He was really good out of the passing game last year as a rookie. Like he put up numbers that were just sub like of what we see from Kamara, CMC, and these other guys, as a passing down back. And he's a guy that Jay Moyer told us like on the film, like how good of a passing down back he was going to be. That all came to fruition. Khalil Herbert has handled 100% of the snaps with the starters this preseason with David Montgomery out. So we were worried about Tristan Ebner, some of these other guys getting, the receiving down work. Like Khalil Herbert is a great upside running back if you started light at running backs. So let's say you through 8 or 9 rounds, you only have 2 running backs on your team. Like you need to really tag some running backs in round 9, 10, 11, or rounds 10, 11, and 12. And you want to try to get 2 or 3 of these guys, especially if you've already got like 5 wide receivers on your team. And if you want more about this, you can go. I have a draft strategy article for quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, all up over at PFF. And I give you example builds for all of them, how you should be thinking. If you started light at running back, if you started heavy at running back, if you started, hero, what could your potential builds look like? And what kind of backs you need to be thinking about, based on your builds. Same thing for receiver, the other positions. So you mentioned it. It's tough at tight end. Some of this stuff is going to end up hitting. There will be something that happens down there, but man, I don't really want. Albert O is really the guy I love because his underlying, talent profile really screamed that he was a player that potentially had the upside. It was on a small sample, but to be, one of those top 5, 6 guys. And that's still there, but he really seems to fall in the doghouse at this point. They're playing him to like the 4th quarter when they're resting all their other starters. Now, Greg Dulcich has been hurt. But the thing I notice is like, just like what, if you look at the offense that they're running now, like it's not just going to be Dulcich that's a problem. They're using Tomlinson and Eric Saubert. Like these are guys that come out and they play all the 21 personnel, which the Broncos are going to use. And so when you're in, sets with only 2, wide receivers, on the field, Alberto's not even going to be out there. It's going to be the guys that can block, right? Because they're trying to get the team guessing, like, are we running or are we blocking? Are we running the ball or are we throwing the ball? And so Alberto's not going to be out there for those. Then if Greg Dulcich comes back and takes just a little bit, it's going to be a problem. So Alberto's a guy I'm fine taking later in drafts. I still believe in his talent profile. Obviously not as much because the coaches seem to have buried him. But yeah, to your point, like it's really tough at tight end once you get into these later rounds. I really like to have one of like my top 6 or top 7 guys. I will say middle rounds, guys, don't spend a pick on Dalton Schultz. Like don't take Dalton Schultz, in round 5 or round 6.
This is coming from a Cowboys fan.
Yeah, well, look, I like him, but he does not give you the same upside as the dual threat quarterbacks. He does not give you the same upside as some of these receivers that can completely blow the top off. Like we like Dalton Schultz. He's just mispriced. Dalton Schultz should be going right next to Dallas Goedert. TJ Hawkinson should be going right next to Dallas Goedert. And Hawkinson has kind of fallen and he's now gotten closer to Goddard. So I'm fine with him. But the people that are just buying into Dallas Goedert just because they think they're all these available targets, like just usually doesn't work out that way, man. He's not a hyper talented player. He's a good player, so, but in the end, like I'm fine with Hawkinson, if you get him at ADP or slightly after ADP. I'm fine with Zach Ertz if you get him at ADP. Zach Ertz is like you're your last one, break, glass in case of emergency. Really. You don't want to reach on him, but if he's sitting there and the ADP is right, you feel good about the rest of your team, you just go ahead and grab him. Because the rest of this stuff, like it's fine. You could get a hold of Dawson Knox, Pat Freiermuth, some of these guys, but there's a lot of questions going on with them. So yeah, when you're in these rounds, again, depends on the way you've built your roster, but let's say you need receivers. We talked about it already. Like, look, you got Kadarius Toney. You got Devonta Smith, you got Sky Moore, you got Chris Olave, you got George Pickens, Tyler Lockett, you've got Garrett Wilson. Remember, when you get into these ranges, stop trying to predict depth charts. Take talent. Take the talented players and you need to be ready to be patient with them. You don't start them in your lineup week 1 and then, get all mad and drop them. Like these players are ranked where they are for a specific reason, and it is a complete profile, right? It's not just talent archetype. Like go look at the tiers over at PFF. Like I rank everything. It's based on the team they play on, the quarterback they play on, like how good we think the team is going to be. Everything is baked in to these, player profiles, right? The talent part, right, is the biggest part still, though. Remember last year, people were like, oh, man, I don't want Jalen Waddle. He's got Will Fuller on the outside. Tua sucks. Devontae Parker's going to get his targets. I took Jalen Waddle and over half of my drafts in round 9 just on the talent alone. And it won me like almost every league I took Jalen Waddle in. Like I won almost all of those because he was my flex player. And like most people couldn't compete with Jalen Waddle at the flex. He was a top 12 wide receiver in PPR formats. People are doing the same thing right now to Garrett Wilson. They're doing the same thing. Don't like the quarterbacks. You got Elijah Moore there. And I get it. I love Elijah Moore too. But this guy's an early first-round pick.
Let me give you two guys, I think, who fall into that exact same archetype you're talking about. George Pickens in Pittsburgh, who is an elite talent, and if he didn't have some off-the-field issues and stuff and some injury, would have been a first-round pick this year. Jahan Dotson with the Commanders, who is a really good player out of Penn State. Those are two guys maybe people in your home league might not know. George Pickens right now is playing in some 2 wide sets in Pittsburgh. Again, we don't really know about the quarterback situation, but at the end of the day, this is a team. They're going to get the ball to Pickens on the outside. He's a baller. He can play. Bet on talent. You bet on Waddle last year. Bet on George Pickens this year. Bet on Jahan Dotson. You can get Jahan Dotson. I'm looking over at some of these ADPs. Holy smokes. Dwayne, you can get him in the 12th round.
Yeah. I've been trying to pump him up like for 3 months and it's still and it's still too late. But even over at FFPC, you can get him in round 11. Like he's not leaving the field. Like he's on the field for every snap. He is the wide receiver too, for Washington. So yeah, Pickens, like he's definitely steamed. Like I was getting him all the time around 17, 18, 17, 18, 17, 18. Now Pickens is a round 9 pick. But, I'm okay with it. Like I moved him up, in my tiers based on what we're seeing in the preseason. I think George Pickens fits, and he's a guy that could keep steaming, and we'll see what happens. And I may, choose to let my foot off the gas. And again, there's news cycles here, folks. Right now, George Pickens is at peak news cycle, right? Isaiah Pacheco, peak news cycle. So I don't often buy players like when I feel like they're at their peak news cycle. Like a lot of these guys will still come back down a little bit. So you just kind of got to read it. But at the end of the day, if you need receivers, all those guys we just named, like all those rookies can be in play. Rondell Moore will be in play. Russell Gage, don't freak out about Russell Gage. Now you can get him around 10 or 11. Like they still paid the guy. His underlying data points suggest that he was already wide receiver 2 worthy. He just played on a really bad team. Now he gets to play with Tom Brady.
Yeah.
His talent profile says wide receiver 2, and now you're with Tom Brady. So Russell Gage is another name to remember in like round 11, round 12, of your drafts. Jacoby Myers I have no doubt he's the best receiver on the Patriots. Like he checks all the boxes I want to see. He's not.
We're still making that Devontae Parker bet.
Yeah, you probably want to get away from that one. Like they're rotating him and all sorts of stuff now. So like Parker's fine, but Jacoby Myers, like, look, we don't need to see anymore. He's already done it 2 years in a row. Like he's already shown, as a young player, like what his targets are, his targets per route run, yards per route run, even with bad quarterbacks, like have been decent. Like, so Jacoby Myers, like if Jacoby Myers catches 7 touchdowns, like where's he going to finish? Like that's the only thing missing from Jacoby Myers. Mac Jones should be a better quarterback this year. Those are all in play. Like Nico Collins, the later you get Isaiah McKenzie. Isaiah McKenzie is the starting wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills from the slot. We don't know who the wide receiver 2 is, to be honest. We think it's Gabriel Davis. Would we be surprised if it's Isaiah McKenzie? We've talked about Gabriel Davis's profile on this show multiple times. Even if Gabe Davis doesn't take a step forward and his targets per route run stay around 18 to 20%, if he plays a full-time role, which he will with the Bills, it's going to be hard for him to not pay off the ADP that you guys are getting him at in the home league, right? It's going to be tighter when you get over and you're talking about FFPC and FFC where he goes round 4, right? You talk about underdog where he goes round 4. But if you can get him in a home league where you get him around 7, he's going to be fine. But at the same time, Isaiah McKenzie, even in these high stakes leagues, like you're getting Isaiah McKenzie in round 13, he could be the number 2 option, on this offense. It could be Knox. It could be Gabriel Davis. But honestly, like McKenzie's flashed as much as Dawson Knox has in his career. He's actually flashed more than what Dawson Knox has. So like from, the underlying data points, we're looking at a talent profile. So that's another one. Romeo Doubs obviously going in this range as well, and they got a weak depth chart, right? Alan Lazard doesn't know what a breakout metric looks like. He couldn't fall on one. Like, and he's been playing football for a long time. Like, look, I'm fine with Alan Lazard. I'm not taking him around 6. Give me Romeo Doubs in round 11. Like, I feel like it's a much better bet. Christian Watson. Everybody's completely forgotten about Christian Watson because he's hurt. He goes in round 14 in high stakes leagues. Like, he's coming back to practice now. Like, so it's a very weak depth chart. You're getting to play with Aaron Rodgers. Man, this is why I'm saying you can build your team so many ways this year. It's just like, dude, it's crazy. Like, there's so much that you can do.
There's so many. And I was just kind of jotting down a list of some guys, before we get out of here. I want to make sure that if people are in a deeper league and they're taking some shots on guys, at some of these positions like tight end, they're always kind of like, I need somebody deeper later. A couple guys that I like, Daniel Bellinger is probably going to start for the New York Giants at tight end. Again, he's not a guy they're going to have in line. They're not going to have him blocking. He's going to go out there and he's going to be running routes, and none of their receivers can stay on the field. He's a really good athlete, kid who maybe, isn't going to be a top 10 tight end this year, but he could surprise you, maybe a DFS play. And I like Jonnu Smith this year, Dwayne. I think the Patriots are going to get him healthy, and they're going to use him a lot more than they did last year. They paid him a ton of dough, and maybe they can use him out of the backfield, get him some snaps, sort of like Deebo Samuel type. Yeah, they need playmakers on the outside, just like we were talking about with the Giants. So I like Jonnu Smith. I like Daniel Bellinger as two late plays.
Yeah, I think they're fine. Like if I'm picking one late round, Jonnu still worries me because they're gonna have Hunter Henry on the field. So it's gonna be problematic. I don't think there's any way all of a sudden we see Jonnu in a huge role, but I do like him. They can't use him less than last year. If I was naming one guy late round, it's Brevin Jordan. Brevin Jordan's playing basically 100% of the passing downs right now in the preseason. The previous coaching staff rotated tight ends all the time, right? Remember you had Jordan Akins and Pharaoh Brown or Pharaoh, I can't remember. Yeah, Pharaoh Brown. And then you had, who was the other guy they had there for a little bit? I can't remember. They've always rotated 2 or 3 tight ends. But now with Pep Hamilton there, they've pretty much committed to using one tight end. Brevin Jordan did hit a couple of, nice little things as far as what breakout metrics look like, from a talent profile standpoint last year. And now it looks like he's going to be in an every down role. And a similar thing, we don't know who the 2 is behind Brandon Cooks in this offense. Is it going to be, Nico Collins? Could be. Is it going to be Brevin Jordan? Could be. And you can get Brevin Jordan for free. So honestly, when I do miss on the tight ends that I want early, I just wait. And I think Brevin Jordan's a name that I'm, warming up to a lot. I actually moved him up, in the ranks.
Jesus, we're digging deep now, putting you on the spot. Any defenses you like for people to draft? A lot of times they say, I want to get one defense, set it and forget it. I got, for instance, people love taking the Steelers or the Ravens. They set it and forget it. But you really do need to play the matchups and kind of look at the first few weeks of the season. Any teams out there? I know you, me, and Ian were doing a draft one day, and we were kind of talking about some different defenses. I like the Eagles. I know, the Colts and the Broncos come to mind.
Play the matchups. It's the Colts. It's the Broncos. Both of those have their first 2 weeks are great. And so you're probably going to have to change it after week 3. San Francisco also has 2 great matchups out of the gate. Now, those teams, like the 49ers and the Broncos, they play in the division with the most shootouts overall, right? Because AFC West and NFC West play each other this year. So you can't just set them and use them all year. But those are teams that you can easily use for the first 2 weeks of the season, and you could be in a really good situation. Cleveland's another one that's got, several really good matchups out of the gate, right? They haven't ever really been able to fully live up to the potential, of some of the talent they've had in the past, but Cleveland could be one. So, and the main thing you're looking for is just look for the teams that play against bad quarterbacks that are going to turn the ball over, preferably on, defenses that, their quarterback on their team, right, is a good quarterback that creates trailing situations for the opposing. That's the perfect scenario, right? You're say the Bucks, for example, you play with Tom Brady. He builds leads for you, right? You're playing against, the Carolina Panthers, who don't have great quarterback play. They've got okay quarterback play. You're playing against Jameis Winston, who will turn the ball over. Those are the kind of things that you're thinking about, right? You want, a defense that's paired with a good offense that creates leads, that is going to be playing against bad offenses that are going to have to throw, right, with bad quarterbacks. That's where you get strip sack fumbles. That's where you get strip sack fumble touchdowns. That's where you get pick 6 touchdowns, all those things. And if you can't find one that's got 2 or 3 matchups, there's plenty of teams that have week 1 matchups.
Yeah. Just in our chat, the Ravens.
Ravens is another one. They're just play it week by week, honestly.
I'm going to even throw at you, Dwayne, a kicker. It's the end of the show. We're giving out freaking kicker recommendations here, but he was hurt a little while. I love Will Lutz for the New Orleans Saints. He's got now Jameis. I think you're going to get drives stalling. He's playing in a dome. Will Lutz is a monster leg and can get you some 50-plus yarders if you play in those deep yardage leagues. No one's going to want to draft him. They're going to forget he's even in the league. So Will Lutz. Now, we're digging deep when it's kicker talk. But so we've covered a lot here, Dwain. Anything else you want to impart on our listeners here as they head into the two biggest draft weekends of the year on how to build this team, how to win, how to have some freaking fun out there in fantasy football? Because at the end of the day, folks, that's what it's all about. You're connecting with your buddies again. Do in-person drafts. Make it a fun event. Make it someplace where you guys want to come back to every year. Make a whole day of it. Go golfing. Go play paintball. Have a big pizza party. Invite the families over. Make it a fun event because, as the NFL likes to say, Dwain, football is family. Fantasy football is all about fun and busting your buddies' balls and winning big Happy Gilmore style checks.
Yeah. No, just it's roster construction. That's the main thing, right? Like remove yourself from player takes. It's still good to like the players, but if you've got your tiers the way you like them, right, you should like all those players in the tier basically equally, right? You might have one slightly ahead, but just using a lot of the tips that we talked about earlier, remembering that there is a lot of flexibility, but in rounds 7 through 11, you're going to have to prioritize based on the way that you've built out your roster. And when you're thinking about roster construction, you're also thinking multiple steps ahead. So what I mean by that, let's say it plays out where you start at pick 12 and you take Saquon Barkley and DeAndre Swift. Comes back to you in round 3. You don't like the receivers are there, so you decide to go with Travis Etienne, right? You start with the 3 backs, okay? Now that you've done that, like you're already thinking about what you're going to have to do because guess what? You need receivers, you still need a tight end, and you still need a quarterback. So each pick that you make from then on, right, depending on what your roster, parameters are and like, how your starting lineups work, right? Each time you make a pick, you're now thinking ahead, like to the next 2 picks. Then you're thinking ahead to the next 2 picks, and you're constantly plotting it out. So like as the draft goes on and it's your turn and you're on the clock, like you've already thought it all through, right? You've already been, and if say something goes wrong, like you're also making your contingency plans, right? So when you draft like that, you need a solid pool of players that you really like at the other positions, in different rounds to make it work. If you've got really, say there's only 1 or 2 guys you like in round 7 at receiver, well, that makes it really tough because if 1 or 2 of those, if those 2 go, you're feeling, oh God, I have nothing. You have to know what your backup plan is. What is it? Are you pivoting to quarterback? Are you pivoting to tight end, in that situation? So you have to be thinking through those things. And what I found is like when you're doing that and you're thinking ahead so much, like honestly, you're just less, you stay way more flexible. You stay, you're thinking multiple steps ahead of your opponents. You stay calm. And it just comes to you. Like the draft just seems to come to you. So again, like just always be thinking, ahead and be thinking about how you're building out your roster, how the last pick that you just made, how much does it change your roster? What are you doing if you get sniped at certain positions? You just want to, I've already thought through all those things because the worst thing I see is like people when they get sniped, right? They just have this freak out moment, right? And then they take a player they don't like. And then they're mad about that. And then it spills over to the next pick and the next pick. And then it's like they're on tilt. And then like, man, it's like, oh, wow, look at that 5-player start. They had all this value fall to them. Things were going so good. And then like the draft just goes off the rails, right? Because one pick didn't go their way. Remember, you're going to have picks not go your way. So just be prepared for them. Know what your plan is. And it doesn't mean you have to take the same position. It may mean a pivot to a different position. And so just know what those things are. And having thought through them ahead of time, when it happens, boom, you just make your next pick. And you're already thinking on to the next thing and thinking, okay, great, that happened. That means that now my targets around receivers, I'm not doing it in round 6, right? I'm thinking round 8, 9, and 10, or maybe it's running back, whichever the case may be. Again, lots of flexibility in the way that you can build your teams in 2022, much more so than what we saw in 2021, 2020. Like we weren't recommending 3 RB starts last year. We were saying, don't do that. We weren't recommending them 2 years ago. We were saying it's probably a tough way to start. This year, there's certain times the board falls a certain way. You can start, with the 3 backs. You can do it with receiver this year. And again, the tight ends like really do matter, Drake. Like tight end, honestly, is the one where the most like that. I'm like, man, I really don't like my teams when I don't at least get Goddard. Usually I'm getting Pitts, I'm getting Waller, I'm getting Kittle. And if I don't, I'm getting Goddard. And on the teams where I miss Goddard, and then say I miss Zach Ertz because I don't want to reach, I just punt the position, right? And it's fine. Like the rest of my roster looks really strong, but I will say like missing on those tight ends this year, I don't feel as good as, I have in some years past.
And if you have to sacrifice one position, I would say to get that tight end, it's receiver, because as we just mentioned, receivers pretty deep. You can get one of these receivers down the line. Just tons of good stuff out there. I look at the fantasy draft like it's a round of golf. You play your best and you draft your best when you're prepared, when you're calm, when you let the round come to you, when you're trying to force things and you say, you know what, I'm going to hit it over these. I'm going to hit it over this pond. I'm going to hit it between these two trees and over this mountain right here. It never works out. It only works when you play the game the right way. Let things come to you. Don't try to be a hero out there. Don't try to be Tiger Woods, and in round 2, you say, I'm going to take, Sky Moore. You don't need to do that. All right. Put the driver away and just, lay up with the 7-iron and take T Higgins. So, all right, Dwayne, anything else, my friend? That was a pretty info-packed hour and a half
Man,
we
I
just
think
gave
that's
people.
no, I think it's it. This has been a lot of writing, a lot of stuff. Like this process started a long time ago. I mean, this goes back to February when I did my first ranks, first projections. And folks, you can go check it all out. Like if you care more about talent and less about situation, you care more about situation, less about talent. Like I share all the data with you on PFF. You can see all of it. Like you can see exactly how these players profiled the way they did. You can see, what person, where I think the upside is at. You can see where I think the players are to avoid. Like it's all baked into the ranks. So spent a lot of time working on this. Obviously, then the draft happened. We adjusted it for free agency, then the draft. We've just constantly been adjusting it, and then started deploying it into drafting. Like I've drafted over 100 teams at this point, and like testing the strategies, testing all the. So it's kind of like all this work to get to like this 2-week period. And so that's why I like this is my favorite podcast every year, because it's really the culmination of like all this work. And some things, have changed. Like some players have moved up, some players have moved down. But it's just like we're at this point now, like we're now like it's all okay. How do we make it actionable? How do we let people go, dominate their drafts? So especially this year, because it's been my first full-time year, right, writing and studying this stuff all year long. And so I've also worked on a lot of my process. Like I've tried to improve my process. I've studied and researched a lot of other things I didn't have time to study and research before, and like integrated that like into the rankings, into the tiers. And so all of it's available. You guys can go check it out. And then and I share everything so that like if you have a different thought than me, great, then like lean into that. That's why I share the data with you. Because at the end of the day, like you always say, Drake, it's your draft, right? At the end of the day, you want to have fun. Like I equate fun, with also winning. So but we also want to have our takes, right? There's certain players that, we like to be right about, because we feel really good about them. And that's still part of it. We're not saying you can't do those things. So like get a nice blend, go have fun, beat your buddies, as Drake said, you guys have a pizza party. Earlier Drake told you guys, we want to swing big and cash big checks. And at the end, he said to lay up with a 7-iron. So do something in the middle, like would be my opinion.
No, I'm saying don't go out and let the draft come to you. Let the round come to you. Like that's always been my issue. We'll get off on a whole golf tangent here when I go, you're like, you know what? I can hit this 7-iron, 200 yards here. And it's like, no, just don't do that. But anyways, you guys don't want to hear about my golf game. Shout out to my boy, Brian Dwyer. He works over at Fantasy Alarm doing their golf projections. He is my golf partner, back-to-back golf league, first round, first half champs. Not that any of you care, but hooray us. So thanks, folks. Go over to Twitter. Check out Mr. McFarland. He is at Dwain McFarland. I am at Drake Fantasy. Officially over 5,000 followers now on Twitter. Woo! Maybe after this show, it'll drastically decline. But thank you to anybody out there who checks
Hopefully
us
it doesn't
out.
decline after our show.
Oh, yeah. It's going down like 8. And of course, if you're over on the YouTube channel, we love you. We thank you. Leave a comment. Let us know how your drafts go. We love when you tweet the draft board to us at FF Hustle. Subscribe to that YouTube channel. Leave us a comment, 5-star review on iTunes. Go over to Underdog, promo code Hustle. If you still need a draft board, our buddies at Draft with Red Zone got you covered. FF Hustle 22 is the code over there. So for Dwain McFarland, I am Brian Drake. Good luck in your drafts these next 2 weeks. Dwayne and I will be around. You'll hear from us. Don't worry about that. And good luck, and never get out hustled. See you, folks.